Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for making time for us today. We're very excited to welcome you to this month's Infoblox System Engineer Tech Series webcast for our technical community, featuring the Infoblox DNS Traffic Control Global Server Load Balancing solution. Today, we're going to be sharing an under-the-covers look at the new features found in NIOS 8.2 and 8.3, and how they improve app availability, performance, visibility, quickly and affordably. We've got some great new features and we're really excited to share those with you. So let's get started by meeting our presenters. My name is Bob Rose. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager located in our Tacoma, Washington office, and I will be moderating our discussion today. And we're fortunate to have with us Senior Sales and Systems Engineer Scott Friedman from Dallas, Texas, and Joe Briante from Ontario, Canada. Welcome, guys. Glad to have you aboard today.
Thanks, Bob. Glad to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so, customers expect apps to be up and running on demand. And certainly when they're down or slow to respond, it causes significant risk to satisfaction, brand perception, productivity, and of course revenue. But DNS-based global server load balancing, or GSLB, enables companies to reroute network traffic and better manage servers and data centers for business continuity. But GSLB solutions can be very expensive, and certainly when they're deployed through multiple servers or as a standalone solution, there are certainly some high capital and operational costs. But fortunately, Infoblox DNS Traffic Control, or DTC, combines DNS management with intelligent GSLB functionality so that you have automated, scalable, high performance, all in one unified solution. So our goal today is to really meet you in a two-way discussion that helps us understand your needs better, and certainly so that you can get a better sense of how DTC delivers performance and faster returns, and determine if our solutions with the new features can benefit you. So let's take a look at today's agenda. So we're going to give you a quick overview of DTC, and then we're going to jump into the details around the new features and demos. So dynamic load balancing with RTD and SNMP, the multi-tier health check support feature. Those are both in 8.2, but since you haven't seen them yet, we wanted to bring those forward today. And then the service record support, state persistence, CSV, which I know is important to several customers, and then the independent backup. We'll also be talking about our government cloud certification, and then we'll wrap up with some Q&A. So why don't we go ahead and jump right into the DTC overview. So Joe, why don't you help us kick things off? Can you give us a little idea of what DTC is? And let's jump in and talk about that.
Certainly, Bob. So yeah, so folks, from a high level, our DTC is basically a global server load balancer. Okay, we like to use the term intelligent DNS.
Right. So so Joe, you were saying that really it's around load balancing and directing clients to the best available server for availability and performance. But can you go into a little more detail now about how it works?
Sure. So unlike a traditional load balancer, which is normally is going to return the IP address of the VIP of that load balancer itself, what we do is we actually perform all of the health checks against the server being queried, and we return the IP address of the most suitable or the ideal server. And again, we do this based on different health algorithms, different routing algorithms, client location, which we'll get into a little bit more detail as we go on. One of the things that's definitely unique to us is the ability to really route users based on their location, as seen within our tight integration with our IPAM database, the IP address management database, making use of a feature or function that we call extensible attributes, right? And again, we'll get into a little bit more details on that. as we go.
Right. So for the folks that are on the call today, if we address quickly what's in it for them, can you address that for us?
For sure. So, again, I mean, the biggest reason that most customers are going to implement global server load balancing is for availability. Okay. So things like uptime on a server, you want to ensure that when a user does a query to a server, that server is going to respond correctly. Okay. Now, we do have several means of, ensuring uptime, with our various health monitors. One of them is obviously, being able to use our tight integration with our DNS and IPAM. And as far as performance goes, you'll see the term here on the slide. You'll see it coming up, a few times in the future as well. LBDN really stands for load balanced domain name. So anytime we created an LBDN server, we can efficiently route those, using several global methods. A couple of the things that are they're also extremely helpful, for Infoblox customers that are implementing DTC are, number one, the single UI. Okay, now this is really critical because implementing traditional load balancing solutions, you most likely have multiple servers. You may have multiple interfaces. There's no real way to tightly integrate those. There's no way to integrate those into your IPAM network, so where users are actually coming from. So the advantage that we bring with our grid management is to be able to centrally manage not only IPAM, DNS, but also the global server load balancing functionality. Combine that with our built-in reporting, which we'll touch on as well. We've got a very powerful solution. And as far as deployment goes, extremely simple. For customers on the line that have actually deployed this already, you'll know that it's literally nothing more than enabling a license on the appropriate DNS servers that you want to run the DTC functionality, and extremely cost effective. You'll see that on the slide we've got the value circled. We're basically providing somewhat 80 to 90% of the functionality at about 20% of the cost of a traditional load balancer.
Joe, that's really outstanding. So if we look at really more around the value that DTC delivers, there are certainly problems that many companies face. One is around slow apps, because obviously the NOC gets lit up, right? As soon as the apps slow down, you get lots of complaints. DTC improves the user experience and certainly helps to deliver the type of performance that you would expect in a global server load balancer. Can you walk us through a couple of these points and explain, how that's important?
Certainly, yeah. So, your comments are absolutely true. Typically when users want to go to a particular server, whether it's an internal web server, some kind of a database server, externally, an e-com server, you want to make sure that it's going to return a response, right? And it's going to respond quickly. Typically when it doesn't, again, like you mentioned, fast complaints, users are going to call in, say, hey, there's something wrong with the application, something wrong with the network, when, in actual fact, it may just involve in, something as being routed to the non-appropriate server, right? So on the intranet side, again, being able to use our unique direct tie into IPAM to easily determine where that user is coming from, is a huge factor in ensuring that we route users to the most appropriate server, one that's going to perform and respond the best. Typically, smaller applications can actually use DTC just as a basic server load balancer. Some other use cases, things like the case for DR sites. So, being able to automatically recover from an internal application failure, or even on the external side, being able to perform DR functionality across data centers. Right? Again, so it's a great solution for that. On the internet side, again, we do have GeoIP functionality built right into the solution as well. So combining GeoIP with our extensible attributes to provide user location, things like that, we are actually able to meet a lot of the privacy challenges of the European Union's GDPR privacy challenges, in that we can limit where users are actually directed to. So, for example, if you decide that you need a user to always be directed to a server within a particular country or city, we can very easily do that with our routing policies. And the final thing is our health monitors. We've got extremely flexible server health monitors, anything from HTTPS, SNMP, and we're going to get into details on some of the newer ones that we've added as well. The whole idea here is to make sure that we never direct users to application servers that aren't performing at their best.
And the beauty with a lot of these new monitors is when you added in things like our SNMP monitors, it eliminates a lot of the requirements of even needing load balancers, because a lot of what load balancers are doing is determining which server to send it to. And with the SNMP health checks, we can talk to a server and find out all these things about its health and its number of connections, and then go, oh, well, if that's the case, then we're going to hand out, these other addresses, not that one, and kind of, maybe potentially eliminates that tier.
Yeah, that's really good. One of the things we talked about just a moment ago is, the capital and the operating costs associated with having 2 or more servers. Obviously, not only it's the acquisition cost, but then you have to, once you install them, you have to maintain them, and certainly that can mean a lot of headaches. Joe, what about the Infoblox solution? Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, so I mean, we've touched on some of these points in the past, but I'll elaborate a little bit. Again, on the licensing model, like I mentioned earlier, it's literally a license that gets enabled on an appliance. So there's no additional hardware that's needed, to get this to get the functionality enabled within an Infoblox grid. Provisioning this is literally 10 to 20 minutes is all that's needed to get this set up and running. I can't emphasize enough how the huge advantage we have from the single UI. So being able to have a single interface, streamlined, being able to manage, instead of having to manage multiple independent servers, we can do it all as one solution, and easy to use, as you'll see in during some of the demos that Scott is going to bring up. It's literally point and click. We've got a lot of good visualization tools and even some built-in testing tools.
That's really good. So Joe, let's maybe turn our focus now and look at DTC compared to conventional load balancer. Scott, can you walk us through this?
Yeah, and Bob, it's a great story that we have where I mentioned, potentially not having to have all these different tiers of application, whether it's global load balancing and server load balancing, and in a lot of scenarios, if you're using a load balancer, you've got a DNS query happening when you're trying to get to some application, and then once the DNS response happens, then the client talks to the load balancer, and then the load balancer has to check the health of the servers to make sure they're available, and then that load balancer finally responds back to the client. So you've kind of got this approach of, well, I got to send it here, and then I got to send it there. But it's doing a lot of the same stuff and a lot of the same functionality. Whereas, and then finally, once the guy talks to the load balancer, then the connection then has to go to the resource pool to get to that application. And it's a lot of steps, and it's extra latency, and then in this scenario, the DNS doesn't really know what's happening on the server side, because there's no correlation there between the two. Whereas with a DTC type solution, you're able to eliminate a few of those tiers and say, well, I need to get to some applications, so I'm going to talk to the Infoblox, and it's checking the state of the health of those servers, and then sending back to Mr. User that, oh, you need to go to server server 2 or .1 on the right there, and we send that connection across, and then it responds back. So we've reduced the number of connections. We've reduced the latency. We've made things, made the application faster and more globally aware. And one of the things that Joe mentioned was using all the topology rules and all the information in the IPAM database. So being able to make intelligent decisions and help speed the application up is kind of the important thing here. So we kind of a little bit about the setup, and I'm going to show it in a demo, so I'm going to kind of go through this kind of quick. But you've got a pool of collection of servers. You could have, you know, single pool scenario with one application. You can have multiple pools in different locations, different data centers, and sort of decide how you want to have connections go to which servers and which pools. And I'll show you the way mine is set up with a active and sort of standby design. Also being able to, Joe mentioned global availability or awareness of these requests, and being able to respond to content based on where the user is. So Joe mentioned you know, the GDPR, right? So in Europe, right, they have to have certain certain servers they have to talk to for compliance regulations. So being able to understand where users are is pretty important to a lot of folks. And finally, I'll let Joe kind of jump in and talk a little bit about our reporting.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Scott. So yeah, I mean, as far as reporting goes, now I'm not going to go into detail on, you know, this particular report. It's a little bit difficult to see. It's a bit blurry. But the idea behind our reporting in general is that we do have a wonderful reporting solution that, when integrated with the grid, can provide all kinds of information, whether it's, you know, trend analysis reports, whether it's specific reports on individual DNS servers, or in this case, specific to DTC, right? So for example, this particular report is going to show us, show us things like, well, how has the DTC response been responding over time? So what servers have we been directing traffic to? So it's a great way to look at, you know, things like trend analysis, or being able to use it as a, you know, as a wonderful debugging tool, as an example. Now, you know, again, it's important, this particular report is important because we're actually monitoring the response distribution trends for the DTC resources over time. When we talk about how to actually get this. So for Infoblox customers that, now we're going to get into a little bit more detail toward the end, how to get our hands on it, but it's literally, it's part of the reporting solution. For those that have used reporting, it's one of our dashboards. Again, this particular one does pinpoint, you know, the actual trend analysis, right? So again, reporting is a wonderful tool to add to any grid.
Why don't we now then go ahead and move into the new DTC features, and we're going to start with the DTC dynamic load balancing using RTD and SNMP.
Thanks, Bob. And before we do that, I want to answer or make a comment about the Q&A. Just remind everybody that we've got the Q&A panel. We've actually got a question Christopher asked about, is GSLB available to anyone with a DTC license, or does it require a separate license? So GSLB is the sort of the industry standard term for what DTC is, right? So yes, DTC is what is the license for doing GSLB. So if we jump into the health monitors, the dynamic health monitors, this was an 8.2 feature, and 8.2 has been out for about 7-8 months now. 8.3 came out about a month ago, and one of the things was being able to have a little more dynamic load balancing ability using these health monitors. So the round trip delay one is it measures the response to the server and keeps track of the average response time coming back to see if there's a latency between the name server and the application server. So we check that and then kind of track that, and you can set up to do and I'll jump over to the demo. You can set up to do the health checks and determine how you want to do that. So we've got these health monitors here, and we've got a lot of our default monitors, and you can create your own and build out ICMP or TCP and specify, for instance, if it's a web application, I would build one that's HTTP on port 80 or 443. And then I've got my SNMP monitor. So this is set up to monitor a couple Ubuntu servers that I have, and I've got SNMP enabled, and I just pulled down the list of all the OIDs and decided I'm going to use this one. This is CPU load over a 5-minute average. So I kind of pointed at that, and what DTC then does for when I assign it to a pool is in the GUI here. I'll assign it to a pool, and then it'll start from these name servers. It'll start doing SNMP health checks to my server. So here you can see the load on my server. It comes back at about 30-some%. They're about the same. Those servers are running about everything's about the same. So it'll tell you what the average is, and Joe mentioned the reporting, and you could build reports even to see what the average load is on these servers, or whatever other SNMP OID you decide to monitor. Maybe you're doing the number of TCP connections. So and then from here you could just go to this pool and say I want to load balance for this pool using using ratio. We've got a number of other load balancing methods, whether it's round robin, global availability, which is everything goes to 1 until it fails, and then everything goes to the next one. So I've got, at the pool level, I'm using SNMP to decide how I want to load balance. So let me jump into the, let me go back to here. Let me jump into the next one and talk about the multi-tier health check support. So when you're setting up these health checks, you kind of have some options as to do I want to monitor at a pool level or at a server level? And you can do them both, and you can set health checks up to say from the pool I want to monitor. I'm going to use the SNMP monitor, but I can also add additional monitors here. Let's say I want to monitor my internet router, or monitor something out on the internet to make sure that my link is up. So this way, if the server health is good but the link is up, we can mark this pool as down, right? So you're able to build these custom monitors to decide what you want to determine as up and down. One of the new things we added in 8.3 is our being able to do state persistence, and we've had it for a while, but now we sync them. We sync the state of these persistence tables across members. So if you've got a bunch of name servers in different locations, and you want to have them all aware of persistence for all these applications, then you could come here and say, I want to turn persistence on, and set a setting for how long I want to have it, and then it'll sync that across all your members. The next thing we added in 8.3 is being able to support SRV records. SRV records are typically important in Active Directory and voice over IP type applications. So with 8.3, I could tell it that for these zones, I want to support service records, and then I can create what we call the LBDN for something like a domain controller, and have my domain controller availability kind of be everywhere. And then with the extensible attributes in the database, you can determine where a user is to which domain controller they get load balanced to. The next one is being able to import and export DTC data via our CSV. We've had some customers that have wanted to be able to migrate maybe off of an F5 or a NetScaler to this, but want to be able to create a bunch of objects all at the same time. So we added this feature, and for demo purposes, I created a little CSV in Excel. I basically I basically started with this one, and then, you know, like Excel let you do, I just kind of dragged these down and did all that, and, you know, drag these ones down as well. And then from here, I can go to the import tab, and Joe mentioned that, you know, everything in our box is wizard driven. So even doing something as you know, usually as complex as importing a bunch of data, here, you know, I can just say I want to import some data, and I'm going to select a file, and I'm going to hit open, and then we're going to hit next. Just hit that in case there's any errors that pop up. And then we'll hit the import, and we'll let this run for a second. Okay, so my import is done, and now I've got a bunch of additional servers here, and now I could take these servers and I could add them to one of these pools or do whatever. So.
Hey, Scott, if I could just add something, you know, when I first looked at this, you know, the particular feature, I thought, well, okay, there's probably limited usability for it. I know Scott spoke about the use case of being able to migrate from an existing solution into here. But you know, some of the customers I've been working with actually have a configuration similar to this, where there's literally hundreds of servers that they want to make, let's say, bulk changes. So let's say they want to change, you know, 50 servers to a different subnet. Well, you could do it in the GUI one by one, but why not use the full functionality that we have, being able to export this data in the CSV format, make your changes, and then import it right back in. Right? So, you know, it's a great way to just work within the context of, you know, DTC without necessarily affecting everything else within the grid.
Hey, Joe, that's really good. We did have another question. I'm not sure if it got answered, but Tom Daly asked for export to provide a template for future changes, set up DTC entries via GUI and export it out. So you guys want to talk to that? He also asked around the CSV header lines for server pools, LBDN, and the associated sub options for each reserved command. Scott or Joe, you guys want to speak to that?
Yeah. So I was going to show what the CSV export looked like. This would probably give you an idea of what an import, you know, if you could just re-import this. So it kind of has it has pretty much every option that you could create. It's got every option here that you could modify. So you could, you know, you could kind of build this out. Mine is pretty simple. I just did A and B, I think, and then I kind of nuked everything else. But yeah, you could set that up, and you could do it here. You know, we've also got our API, and I know we have a lot of customers who do a lot of these changes using the API versus this, or even worse, versus manually creating a million things.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, Scott, we also have a separate CSV guide as well, right? That'll show you, you know, the different formats, not just specific to DTC, but just in general, you know, kind of how to typically set up, you know, the various sections of a, you know, typical grid import tool or import CSV file, what it would look like.
Right. Yeah. We do. So the next one is the backup and restore, and we added this in 8.3 as well to be able to simply, you know, we've had a grid backup and we've had a reporting backup, but we've never had the ability to just back up, and more importantly, to be able to restore the DTC config. So here in the grid tab, where you would come here and do a backup, you could do a DTC backup here and just the same do a restore. So if I went here and did a manual backup, it's simply just going to do a DTC backup and save it locally here, and then I could do the same and just hit restore, and it would restore all my data exactly as it is.
All right. Hey, thanks, Scott, for sharing. I wanted to bring to light some new functionality as well with NIOS 8.3. So DTC actually works in the government cloud environment. And so we offer support working within a number of FedRAMP infrastructure clouds, especially with AWS GovCloud and Microsoft Azure Government. And so that's pretty important because it really emphasizes Infoblox ongoing commitment to NIOS, number one, and it also demonstrates our dedication to the top security standards required by federal, state, and local government agencies, integrators, and of course the supply chain. So that's really important. And in terms of benefit, it certainly supports the government cloud initiatives that many government agencies are now having to address, and it helps to ensure a smooth customer experience, especially in terms of meeting government requirements. So I wanted to just bring out a few facts here. You know, we've operated in Amazon Web Services GovCloud since August 2016, and we are now certified with Microsoft Azure Government. We have a vDiscovery capability that supports that. We've also recently passed FIPS 140-2 requirements, and those have been submitted. We're just waiting for an official announcement from NIST. And then there's also the Common Criteria EAL2 certification. We've been actually Common Criteria certified since NIOS 7.1, and we recertify with each major release. And then, of course, there's the Defense Information Systems Agency, or DISA. Some of our large customers, especially serving government, want to know about that because we're on the approved products list for DoD infrastructure. So we continue to make that commitment to support government. And for those that are on the call that are interested in more information around back office or cloud DDI infrastructure guidance, or perhaps solutions that specifically relate to government, you can certainly reach out to the federal account team and get more information. But wanted to just share a little bit about that in terms of our government initiatives. And so, Scott, why don't we move on and just, again, talk about Infoblox DTC. Why is it important? I think, Joe, you were going to speak to this a little bit. Of course, there are some advantages around uptime. We talked about that, performance, centralized management, and of course, a lower cost with easy deployment. Can you walk through some of the differences that we have relative to some other competitors on the market?
Sure. So, you know, again, you know, the first advantage, you know, like you mentioned earlier, ensures app uptime. So this is our kind of our unique ability to tie our DDI database, you know, specifically the, you know, the network side of, you know, side of the database with our with the extensible attributes to very quickly identify users. So, you know, using the you know, the visualization tools and, you know, the tools to easily set that up within the grid, that, you know, it's very, very difficult to not make to make a mistake within the configuration. It's just so simple to do. Right? As far as app performance, you know, just simplifying load balancing just by using DNS on its own versus, you know, the typical industry practice, which, you know, as we spoke about earlier, does use, you know, the VIP of a you know, traditional load balancer. And, you know, again, just given our broad functionality when it comes to server monitoring, you know, being able to do that will, you know, we will never have to, you know, be concerned with directing users to servers that are either, you know, malperforming or, you know, could be down. The next bullet really talks about centralized management. You know, I think I brought this up, you know, a few times, but being able to globally have a look at not only IPAM, you know, DNS DCP, but also the DTC config, the global server load balancing functionality, and how that ties in, and be able to centrally report on that. Again, is a critical functionality that really separates us from everybody else.
And Joe, could I just add something there? One of the things about the reporting and analytics component. It is built on the Splunk engine. So,
Right.
you know, we have over 100 reports available through the sample report guide. These are pre-built. They have been designed by our engineering team to, you know, help you get the information you need off the network quickly. In fact, you could have that up and running in as little as 20 minutes. And the advantage is, of course, is that the filters that are available through the reporting engine make it really simple so that you don't need to have Splunk programming background or expertise. But if you do have that, you can actually customize those reports and get virtually anything that you need simply by going in, picking a report from the list, and then doing modifications to get the information you're looking for. You can email that content out. You can certainly support you know, alerting. And so there's some real great advantages. There are a number of DTC reports that are also available, custom reports. I think we touched on one just earlier in the call today, but there are certainly a lot more that you can utilize as well. So just keep those things in mind as well as you think about that centralized management and reporting analytics.
Yep. Yep. And Bob, so as far as you know, wanting to try out DTC, you know, Bob, I don't know if you had any comments you wanted to open this one up with.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's really simple to do. It's super easy, right? So if you already are an Infoblox customer, all you have to do is go to the command line on an existing Infoblox appliance and type in set temp license as you see it there, and then pick it from the menu, and it's just that fast and easy. That gives you a 60-day trial license, which is really advantageous. So you can actually try out a lot of these features that you've seen here today. If you are not yet using Infoblox, however, certainly you can contact your sales engineer or the sales account team and get an appliance, install the temp license, and get started. So, you know, we're serving over 7,000 organizations. Security is built in. You know, it's coupled with exceptional reporting, as we just mentioned, and we do offer that enterprise class DDI services, and we've done it for over 15 years. So these are all real strong advantages.
And the evaluation is nice because you know, most customers typically will do that in a virtual environment. So, you know, it's easy enough to sign up online, and you get an account created. You can then download our virtual appliance off of our support portal, and then deploy it on, you know, VMware, OpenStack, or Hyper-V, or whatever you're running, and then get started and be able to get testing kind of and mess around with it right away.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, Scott. You know, I know that a lot of the customers I've been working with in the past, you know, are a little bit apprehensive when it comes to testing new functionality in a production grid. You know, so like you mentioned, you know, for existing customers, it's just like Scott explained, nothing more than downloading a brand new VM, firing it up, enabling the licenses you need, including DTC, and you can literally test this on your own with, you know, either yourself or just a small group of users to verify that functionality without necessarily, you know, affecting your production environment. It's a very, very clean way to do it.
So let's talk about next steps. You know, we have a number of DTC resources that are available off of infoblox.com. There's a data sheet. We have white papers. There's a solution note. In fact, today we're going to be sending you a white paper and a solution note for your attendance today. There's also videos that are available both on the website as well as on YouTube. We have a case study on DTC from the Hershey Company that's very interesting to read, and we can send that out to you as well if you're interested, but you can simply go on and download that. And then we have an IDC DTC analyst report that came out just recently. If you haven't seen that yet, that's another resource. We'd be glad to engage to talk with you around GSLB and what your needs are. You know, Joe and certainly some of our other SEs. And Scott, of course, can set up a use case in the lab and actually let you see DTC and how it works. If you have some specific questions, we can also do a cost-benefit analysis for you. You can simply get access to this and more by reaching out to our telephone number or just by sending an email to info@infoblox.com. And so there's lots more resources that are available. We're here to support you. And so what we'd like to do now is open it up to some Q&A. I think we've had, some good questions already, but perhaps there might be some additional questions that you might have. So let's go ahead and open it up to Q&A.
One of the questions we got asked was, if we have hardware grid instances, can we add VM appliances as new grid members? The answer is absolutely. Most of our customers, or a lot of them, mix and match hardware and virtual. Just as long as they're not an HA pair, that's kind of the only limitation. It's a great question. Thanks for that.
Other questions that you might have? Okay, I can address this one. Kenneth Cox, thanks so much for your question. When will we see the NIST announcement for FIPS? That's a great question, right? We've already met all of the requirements. It's now kind of waiting on the federal government. So usually their feedback is usually 60 to 90 days. Sometimes they can go longer. So I would expect in the fall, perhaps October, perhaps November, maybe it's sooner than that, but at this point, all of the requirements have been met, and we used Leidos as our independent lab, and so all of those requirements were addressed, and everything was sent off actually last month. So hopefully we'll see that response coming up fairly soon. Thanks, Kenneth.
Hey, Bob, we had a question sort of asking a little bit about the differences between us and someone like an F5. And I like to kind of have that conversation because to me it comes down to a couple of things that Joe actually mentioned. He mentioned the ease of use and the integrations with all of our other DDI or DNS and DHCP and IPAM products, being able to take all the data that you have in your IPAM database and utilize that to make more intelligent load balancing decisions, right? Someone like an F5, they can look at source IP or they can look at geolocation information, but that's kind of the limit of what they can see. Whereas with having all that data there and being able to act on it, and makes the transition a lot easier, and a lot of our customers already know how to use us for DNS and already have it in place, the infrastructure there. Joe mentioned being able to license it, and Bob said about using the temp license. That's an easy way to test this out and see if something like a global load balancing is good for you, and without having to make a bunch of changes and put in a bunch of equipment just to test something out. Whereas if you're already using this equipment for DNS, it makes sense to be able to just say, well, I want to do the exact same thing I'm doing. I want to do DNS on a DNS product, not on a load balancing product. And then have all the correlation with the reporting, like Joe talked about, being able to see all the the application state and transact and history and all this data that we've got, be able to report on it. F5 doesn't have much in the way of reporting and all that. They'll tell you to use a Splunk or use something else. So.
Yeah, Scott, that's really good. Thanks for those insights. One of the things that we were talking about today in 8.3 is, the certification for Microsoft Azure Government. And one of the features that enables that to happen is vDiscovery. And Joe, maybe you could just give a quick overview of vDiscovery, and just so that I'm sure there's lots of people that understand that already, but can you address that at a high level for those on the call?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, like Bob had mentioned, vDiscovery or virtual discovery is something that we've had built within the Infoblox solution for many years now. We actually built it with tight cooperation with our awesome partners VMware. So we actually were able to do a virtual discovery using VMware's own APIs and communicate right with a VMware hypervisor or operations center, whatever the case may be. We can actually start a discovery, do a scan on all the virtual machines that are actually running within that particular environment, and pull that data right into IPAM. So now you've got a full catalog on what the virtual machines are, any host names, their IP addresses, MAC addresses, what virtual switches they're on, et cetera. So again, like I mentioned, we've had that for several years now. What we've done is we've taken that and extended that functionality up to our public cloud offerings. And we can do this both in Azure and AWS, where you can now do a virtual discovery of all your workloads that are up and running in, Amazon or Azure, as an example, and pull that same data into the IPAM database, right? So now there's no more guesswork or no more, having to maintain a separate spreadsheet of what all your workloads are, where they're located, what their IP information is. We can natively do that and pull that data directly in, right? So it's a great solution that we've extended now out to public cloud offerings as well.
Yeah, that's really good, Joe. Thanks for that. Let's see. Are there any more questions?
We've had a couple of questions, kind of in relation to roadmap items and things around pricing. And I'd like to remind everybody, this forum is for general kind of information that we would advise contacting your sales team and letting them know that you want to kind of have a further discussion around DTC, and a lot of it is we like to talk about the environment and understand, let customers understand what the impact of turning DTC on is, if and where your current environment is. So we like to kind of review where people are at, and discussing prices is usually between the account manager and the customer. So we would advise doing that, but we would be happy to have further conversations with you around that and around roadmap items as well.
Okay, are there any other questions? Again, we do have, it looked like a couple of other things that popped up. Did you see, Scott or Joe, did you see those questions?
Yeah, so one of the questions is around DNS delays and what, as you move things or upgrade things, and the DNS delay is typically taken into consideration when setting it up. So when you kind of decide on the TTL, kind of that determines how long that record gets cached before the next time the client does a DNS query. So sort of determining, the shorter you have it, the faster it'll be, but of course, then the less caching you have, the more traffic there is. So there's kind of a fine line to sort of understand, based on the application you're trying to deploy, how you'd want to set that up.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. A special thanks to Scott Friedman and Joe Briante and Srinivas Penamuka behind the scenes. Again, thank you for attending today. Please watch for our follow-up email, our free offers, and also for announcements to join this SE DTC Tech series in the months ahead. We will have more technical information and conversation around DTC. We appreciate your interest in Infoblox DTC, and we'd like to wish you a good day. Thanks for joining us. This concludes today's presentation.